Hello everyone, Andrew Baskin here, partner at Lift Economy. A quick announcement before today's show. Lift Economy is proud to be co-hosting the Dismantling White Supremacy Unconference on June 14th and 15th at Impact Hub Oakland. The goal of this unconference is to provide a space for people of color and white allies, including activists, policymakers, business leaders, and more, to have an explicit and courageous conversation about dismantling systemic white supremacy and the many discussions that come up around white supremacy in a community-led forum. Visit www.dismantlecollective.org to learn more and to register for this exciting event. Get your tickets today before the event sells out. And lastly, a quick shout out for those who might be interested in our upcoming Next Economy MBA online course. You can use promo code #NextEconomyNow to get a 15% discount. Seats are filling up, so claim your spot today. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. I'm your host, Andrew Baskin. The goal of this interview series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, democratic, diverse, transparent, and whole systems approach to using business as a force for good.
There are many approachable models of how communities can live, and many times people are feeling denied access to community because they have been told all their life this is how life is, when in all actuality there are indigenous communities around the world that operate totally differently, but there's this spiritual connection, there's this wellness that's beyond, okay, I got food, shelter, yada yada. There's this unison of energy, this amazing occurrence of connection that a lot of people here, especially in America, are thirsty for, yet they don't even know the word or the definition of what they are thirsty for. That's why consumerism and capitalism have enterprised off of it, is like if you make people unhappy, you tell them they're unhappy and you tell them that something will bring them happiness, or you give them those little serotonin and dopamine bursts, you get that feel-good feeling. When someone gets a job, they really need something. They either want to give their mom a gift, they want to get a car for the first time, they want to give their family something, they want to pay off a bill that's stressing everybody. They get paid, they do their work, they feel good. It feels right. Sometimes it's usually a lot of altruism. A lot of altruistic gestures give you that happy little boost. But then people associate it with, oh, I made the money, and when I bought that, it felt good, and when I gave that, it felt good. But we then start unhealthy relationships in that capitalistic endeavor.
In this episode of Next Economy Now, Erin Axelrod, a partner at Lift Economy, interviews Kanyon Sayers-Roods, who also goes by her given native name, Coyote Woman. She's proud of her heritage and her native name, which comes with its own backstory, and is very active in the native community. She's an artist, poet, published author, activist, student, and teacher. The daughter of Anne Marie Sayers, she was raised in Indian Canyon, trust land of her family, which currently is one of the few spaces in Central California available for the indigenous community for ceremony. Kanyon Coyote Woman's art has been featured in the DeYoung Museum, the Somarts Gallery, Gathering Tribes, Snag Magazine, and numerous powwows and indigenous gatherings. She is a recent graduate of the Art Institute of California, Sunnyvale, obtaining her Associate and Bachelor's of Science in Web Design and Interactive Media. She's motivated to learn, teach, start conversations around decolonization, reindigenization, permaculture, and to continue doing what she loves, which is expressing herself through art. So without further ado, please enjoy Erin Axelrod's conversation with Kanyon Coyote Woman Sayers-Roods.
Kanyon Sayers-Roods, we are so grateful that you're joining us today on Next Economy Now. Welcome to the show.
Mishmin Tuhis, I'm really happy and glad to join this conversation. Thank you.
I'd love it if you would start by introducing yourself to our listeners. What is your story and how did you get involved in this movement?
Kanrakat Kanyon Coyote Woman Sayers-Roods. I identify as a California native. I come from Indian Canyon Nation. My mother is tribal chairwoman Anne Marie Sayers of the Indian Canyon Mutsun Band of Costanoan Ohlone people. And having been raised in Indian Canyon, I have the privilege and honor of being raised on the land of my grandmother's 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 grandmother, and as my mother and my grandmother have shared since time immemorial. That being said, as an up-and-coming leader and activist and ancestor in training, a lot of this work has been lifelong expectation as well as commitment. So I've kind of been in the forefront of a handful of things and then followed amazing trailblazers and leaders and motivational speakers, as well as those who are holding culture close to their heart and honoring truth and history. So yeah, as a California Native woman, fighting for the rights of nature, honoring truth and history around recognizing that we are on occupied Native land, and being an up-and-coming leader of our own governing community. There's a lot that I've stepped into that I have a lot of connection to responsibility and a value, generally a commitment that I need to uphold.
Well, I can't wait for our listeners to learn more from all that you've been absorbing and practicing. And I love how you put it, ancestor in training. I'm curious if you could share some of that training with our listeners, because I think there's a lot of wisdom that you hold around caring for our home in the modern age. Maybe let's start there.
Well, I would love to introduce myself as the CEO and founder of Kanyon Consulting, a consultation LLC that just became incorporated in 2018. So starting this new year in a good way. And that being said, I offer Indigenous insight intensives as well as cultural competency trainings. To be a good ancestor in training is to recognize that we have a deep responsibility. Many times when I or my mother will visit classrooms, we will inform even third graders, fourth graders, that at some point in their life, they will be in a position of making decisions, and they need to understand that it's important that they need to consider the impact of those decisions, that impact to not only their family or their community, also to their kin, the plants and the animals, their environment, as well as the next generations. That they should consider that the decision they make has a deep impact, that our actions and our words will affect those around us and those coming after us. And sometimes that really does mean saying no to the quick investment at the quarter-end dividend. It means considering all aspects. So when we think about, let's say something simple. Let's say someone has a business where they bottle a new green lotion. They may like to say, oh, this causes no harm to women's bodies, i.e. the lotion doesn't hurt someone's skin. But what does it really mean to have a deep investment in a no harm to women's bodies through the entire creation of that entire product? Meaning not just the lotion, the actual chemical concoction, but the bottling process or the marketing process or where the items and ingredients come from. The entire process needs to be harm-free to women if you are going to claim that commitment. And sometimes that means struggling in a system that tends to not always care about the value of humanity or our relations, our kin, the animals and the plants. So that's kind of along the lines of what I bring to conversations, especially cultural competency trainings, to talk about what it means to be on occupied Native land, to honor what we call Indigenous protocol. Indigenous protocol is something that has transpired since humanity began, when people started grouping together and calling a space their home. Whenever today people follow an etiquette of, I ask little kids, I say, what do we do when we want to borrow a cup of sugar? Do we walk right into someone's kitchen and take it? Or is there some sort of etiquette or practice that we follow? And the kids are like, no, we don't walk in and take it. Or some like to joke and say yes. And then I'll knock on the wall or knock on a hard surface. And people go, knock on the door, ask permission. And I will voice to them, yes, consent culture is key. If you are not on the home of your ancestors who have always been here, then you are a visitor. And seeking permission from the original peoples, the original caretakers, the original stewards of the land is an important part of being in relation to the land. And following Indigenous protocol is becoming familiar with that knowledge. Now, other countries have raised awareness of this, like, let's say, Canada or even Australia. Australia has a protocol of practice called Welcome to Country, where the Aboriginal Indigenous peoples will welcome people to country saying, all right, you're acknowledging the land, you're acknowledging the communities on the land, and you're recognizing that you are a visitor. Now, here in the United States, Western settler colonialism has impacted us, and many historians and information made available to us have been misinterpreted, whitewashed, diluted, degraded, and honoring truth and history is not even a priority of people. And that's very problematic. It's problematic not just because Native people should be acknowledged for being here and present. But when it comes to land stewardship, responsibility to land, Native peoples don't own the land. They are caretakers. They're in relationship with, which means we tend and steward these spaces in a good way. We have a reciprocal relationship with these living systems. We will offer offerings of songs and medicine to the plants when we harvest them. We engage in ethical, sustainable harvesting practices. We don't do this clear cutting. We don't do this monolithic agriculture or livestock. And being in relation to honoring these life systems is a necessity, is a part of life. And the same thing when it comes to land management. Indigenous peoples around the world use fire. And today we have Smokey the Bear saying fire is bad, and all these scary stories about could cause fire, and we don't have a good relationship with fire. Yet when we think about sudden oak death and the disease that is running rampant within these oak trees, it is because our lack of land management practices where fire would have been used. Now we have governments and state agencies saying, let's preserve the land, let's conserve the land, let's put a fence around it and leave it wild. These wildfires are bad, and we need to put a fence around it and leave it wild. And it's like we have forcefully divorced humans' relationship to the land and the stewardship practices, of which has created the detriment that we are currently in. With these huge fires, because we've created these tinder boxes, we don't have a relationship with the land, we don't listen to it, we don't talk to it, we don't respect it. And that is something that we can yield insight from Indigenous communities everywhere around the world. And that's something that I just bring to the forefront. So that's just a tip of the iceberg.
Beautiful. Well, congratulations on launching your consulting company, Kanyon. We're really, really excited to hear more about that. And our listeners will be familiar with some of what we're talking about, just because we've had Karina Gold on. We've also had Val Lopez from Ohlone-Mutsun on, talking about fire tending and fire management, and also the original instructions, how to ask permission. And I'm grateful for you reminding our listeners of that. And I'm really curious, because I know you did just host a big work day out at Indian Canyon, actually this past weekend. And I'm wondering if you could share any insights with our listeners around, maybe bring them in, show them a picture of what it looked like, how non-natives and natives work together, and kind of what happened this weekend. I wish I could have been there, so I'm selfishly asking on my behalf too.
It was a beautiful weekend. We also opened up the Friday and the Sunday after, so people who had to travel long distances were able to camp out and ground themselves so they could wake up rested and engage. And it was beautiful because we knew we were walking into this conversation of California Ecological Restoration Camp procedure as new community members. So the assessment of the land, as well as assessing the community of what community we have, the skills that they have, to ensure that we can align people with the various tasks that the local land community needed. And so we chose to invite SuddenOakLife.org community members to offer a presentation. So there was an incentive for the community to come learn from the presentation and possibly even apply their skills. And so that was the dominant conversation, where a beautiful presentation was shared about restoring oaks utilizing fire mimicry skills. Even before that presentation, we grounded ourselves in ceremony and acknowledging who is part of the conversation. So we went up to the waterfall, we passed one waterfall and went up to the second one, and we had a small circle where we acknowledged the land, we acknowledged the community, we recognized that we are visitors, and we humble ourselves in being invited in this space. And then I offered a song, and then I asked everyone to share where they came from and possibly how they were feeling. Sometimes it's a great way to ground ourselves, to say where we come from, and sometimes people are like, wait, you want me to know where I came from, like yesterday, or like maybe my ancestors? And I say, whatever you feel comfortable with, as well as whatever you know. Some people will say, well, I reside in Huchin, currently known as Oakland, and my ancestry come from over here, over there, and over here. I loosely identify with this. I'm still learning this. And it's a beautiful way to ground ourselves. And therefore, some people start to learn, it's applicable in any way. If I don't know my ancestors, I can acknowledge the native peoples of the land we are currently on. And it's just a beautiful way to get a sense of who's present. And we started talking about all of the needs of the community, from simple needs of water infrastructure, stream restoration, as well as fire prevention. So, cleaning up branches and leaves, but also protecting some of the oak trees. After we learned from that presentation of Sudden Oak Life, we are able to look at oak trees a little differently, like finding out, because the instructor or the educator said, let's go out and talk and listen to the trees and find out how we may or may not be able to apply some of the knowledge we are learning. And the beautiful part is we got to show a oak tree that had already been worked on by Lee Klinger, the organizer of Sudden Oak Life, and show have a conversation, like be able to visit it after a few weeks. So it was really wonderful to already see some of the steps taken to work with the oak tree. And then all of the community members are like, okay, how can we approach and talk about these trees? So we wandered around and found some oak trees that were a little ill, or some of them that might be susceptible. And so mimicking fire was amazing, from limiting the lichen and the moss to a little burning of the bark to strengthen it, offering various minerals and calcium and azomite and a few other things. I was really impressed in the instructor's ability to share. I really appreciate they centered it in Indigenous knowledge and practices of listen to the land. Just because we learn these things, just because we took a permaculture design course or an ecological study or a survey, doesn't mean we should just go right to some place, start assessing and saying, well, this is what this area needs. It's a process, and it means establishing relation. And so I really appreciated that conversation being grounded with that focal point. And so from there, we also talked up and down the canyon, talking about edible plants and medicinal plants, the elderberries, the mugwort, the black sage, the purple sage, the white sage, and other the laurel bay, the edible nuts, the acorns, acorn processing, showing our small tiny little cultural display, our ethnobotanical cultural display, and how that building needs infrastructure assistance, and how we educate students all the time, but we also need a little help, and how many community members we serve annually, in excess of 6,000, and how we do it on a dominantly shoestring budget. We have our nonprofit, but it's grassroots, and we're not a park. We're not a federally funded agency. This is literally the kindness of a woman who opened her land in the efforts of giving opportunities for Indigenous people in need of land for ceremony. And along those lines, also opening it up for educational purposes. And I aim to continue in honoring that legacy. And so me stepping into talking about plants and educating, and also asking, hey, there are things that I don't know. There might be more efficient or strategic approaches to help the canyon, and I would love help. And so I'm always willing to collaborate and network and seek community members who may know, from sustainable living systems, off-the-grid living systems, to providing community-based efforts, like even just like community guidelines, because I'm looking up like hybrid woofer agreements, because if we have people who come to stay for a little while, we want to make sure, one, they know that they're on their own when it comes to safety, but other things of just like the serious policies and procedures. I know I'm new to this more practical 21st century application of how businesses are run. At the same time, I bring the cultural value of Indigenous pedagogies and Indigenous wisdom keeper sense of responsibility to land management and connection to these living systems. So I'm trying to step between worlds of cultural knowledge and cultural revitalization, as well as 21st century business management, and finding sustainable sources and assistance and agreements and all that fun stuff. So I had lovely conversations with community members. It was beautiful. And so we started working on the land. Some community members started cleaning out the ponds, so the water storage was increased, thinning out various invasive plant species to ensure that the local Indigenous plants had room and space to have an opportunity. I shared a story back when San Francisco State University visited the canyon. They cleared part of the pond out, and we have an invasive patch of vinca, this little ivy, this rhizome. And when we cleared it up, no more than a week later, these little plants started popping up, and they grew really tall, almost taller than me. And they had little trumpet-like flowers, some of them white, almost yellow, and their leaves were sticky. And I was like, what are these? I've never seen these. I learned that they were tobacco, wild California tobacco. I'm sitting here like, wait a second, these were here? And a lot of California indigenous plants will go dormant until the right opportunity arises. And sometimes that means we need to steward and tend the land for those opportunities. We have a responsibility to it. And so I shared them that story. And so a few of them were kind of inspired. They're like, all right, let's go help that part of the pond. And then we also have a healing pole that needs to be restored. So we have hashtag Healing Pole Restoration Project. We have another project that I need help with, hashtag Team Tiny Home. My elder uncle, who's disabled, is in a not so safe environment in a RV that's not the healthiest. And so I'm trying to find a way to build a tiny home on Indian country. So, hey, for those who have knowledge, we are not subject to city, county, or state regulation because we are on Indian country. And so I wouldn't mind any insight on off-the-grid, sustainable, fully encompassed living system. And so we're just haphazardly approaching it and taking it on because something needs to happen. And instead of waiting for the right conditions, the right amount of money, the right anything, we just started. So we just have the floor right now.
I love it.
I want to get it built now.
This is very Lift Economy. We were just at a Buckminster Fuller Institute event, and all that you're speaking about is so Buckminster Fuller of you, and in terms of just doing what needs to be done, forging pathways and partnerships to work together to reclaim livelihoods and lifeways that are more in line with ecosystems and bioregions, and living lightly in tandem with ecosystem processes. So I am so curious about, you've done so much education, so much teaching. Your songs have graced so many events. You've been called on to kind of give the introductions at many events in honoring right relation with the indigenous tribes whose stolen land we inhabit. I'm curious if there were like a moment, or how you moved into recognizing that there was possibly a demand for your consulting, and that there was really it was clear to you that you needed to kind of become more formal in your consulting approach. Could you share maybe that story a little bit?
Definitely. So fundamentally, when it comes to acknowledging the land and maybe people inviting my mother or myself to an event, that's a sharing of culture. And sometimes that's a blessing or a connection to culture. And it's not always the easiest thing or the safest thing to charge for. Like when people say, what's your performance fee? What do you charge? And it's like, really, it feels spiritually grungy to say, oh, I charge this much for me to come to a space to either bless or honor, acknowledge ancestors of the land. That's a culture sharing opportunity that, yes, is invaluable. It's priceless. Most definitely people need to consider time and travel, wear and tear on vehicles, wear and tear on human beings. But when it comes to today's cultural economy, we are really focused in this capitalistic society, and we need to step away from that. And so when I tell people, it is actually up to the individual who's seeking the cultural representative, the indigenous cultural representative, should be invited by the community member, and the offer should be made by the person who's inviting. I make a romanticized version of saying, okay, if we have a medicine person of the indigenous community who's doing the work to help the community, you have a family member or your child who needs care, you seek out this medicine person. This medicine person is probably not going to say, oh, I won't help your child unless you give me this much. The connection is that person will probably do what they can to help you. And then as your child is probably getting better, or everything that's done is possible, the value of that interaction is on the person who sought out that. And that you, at that window of time, you would probably offer what you could. You'd offer what your child's life is worth to you. And that probably is going to be as much as you can. As much as you can, because of course you still need to sustain yourself. At the same time, you also respect the knowledge and the help and the care that was given. So therefore, you would offer as much as you can. And so I bring that into modern day context, saying, offer as much as you can afford. If you can pull it off, tap into your budget and give truly as much as you can afford, because this work is ongoing. Majority of the people who hold this space are not being advantageous, or they're not even hoarding these resources. Most of the time, these resources go back and empower community members. So therefore, I realize every time a new person says, can you come and offer land acknowledgements? Can you come and offer a prayer? Can you come and open and bless this place? And then they're like, how much do you charge? I'm sitting here like, I feel gross every time I have to give a number. At the same time, I still need to consider myself, my time, my efforts. And then in it, we are establishing relation. We are establishing connections. So therefore, this knowledge I'm sharing, these intellectual property rights of my own as well as my community and culture are invaluable. At the same time, considering that this is true work. So if I create a workshop, or if I create a lecture series, or a speaking opportunity, and also empowering other community members, I need some sort of 21st century mechanism to operate in this world. So I co-founded it with my partner, Scott Torito, who has in excess of 30 years experience in the mortgage industry, realized that he was selling his soul and had no connection to life and passion of that kind of existence. And once he met me and started realizing a deep disservice has been done to everyone in the education system. All of these students, even when he was in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, he was told lies. And what does that mean to have a systemic approach to teach the teachers, to engage the educators and anyone in position of activating or interacting with the public, coming across when it comes to messaging, just simple messaging, like let's say state parks or historians or teachers, when they say the Ohlone people were here, they used to live like this. And then when the teacher's like, do you know any Ohlone people now, or do you know if they're here? And most of the kids say no. And it's because we use those words, past tense. And just because we don't see community members, yes, there's not that many of us, does not mean we don't exist. And so your messaging comes across, and you need to be culturally competent to be talking about Indigenous peoples. I've been constantly saying nothing about us without us. If you're going to write a paper, if you're going to talk about us, if we're not part of your conversation, if we're not consulted or involved in some form, you're doing a deep disservice, and you shouldn't be engaged on it. Like, it's okay to talk about your own personal experience. Be accountable by saying, I met California natives and I heard them talk about X and I heard them talk about Y, versus I know California natives feel this way and I know this. Instead of saying that, be accountable. Just say, in my communal connections with these people and this community, I have learned this. I don't know how to talk about these issues because I don't live this world as that community member, though what I have learned is A, B, and C. Just that humility and that confidence in being able to say, because many times people say, oh, we feel this way, or those people don't like that. It's like, who are you to say? You don't have a right to say it, even though you may have heard it, maybe only one person. Like, I, Kanyon Sayers-Roods, happen to not like the word American Indian. At the same time, I have been called American Indian, and I have realized we do need to use it because government contracts and treaties use those forms of words. So if we immediately try to politically correct everything, we'd actually be shooting ourselves in the foot in saying, oh, guess what? Those contracts, those treaties are null and void because there's no more American Indians. And I realize that. But when someone hears me say, I don't like American Indian, they might say, oh, you people don't like that. And then they go to another Native person saying, you don't like that, right? And instead of saying, may I ask how you identify? I'm curious what you may prefer. How may I be respectful in voicing how you want to be identified? Like, same thing with gender pronouns, consent culture. That person over there has a really cool sweater, and until they tell me who they are, or if I describe them, I may say that female-bodied person. But until they tell me they identify with he, she, they, them, other, I will continue to say they. And it's simple. And yeah. And so when it comes to just messaging, just respect and consent culture and accountability, because even to this day, there are archaeologists and historians who say, nobody lived in the Bay Area up until 5,000 years ago, and the Ohlone people came here. And it's like, wait a second. And they wrote it with confidence. And they wrote it back in the 80s saying 5,000 years ago is when people came here. And they said it as a matter of fact. But oh wait, the same archaeologists, next generation, have carbon dated that the oldest archaeological sensitive site in the Bay Area is 9,800 years. Wait a second. I just saw that museum curated bit of work that said 5,000 years, and they said it with confidence, and they're informing the public. Wait, there's a lot of misinformation going on, and it's when people feel confident about something. And so to this day, people are like, you guys came across the Bering Strait. And I'm like, there are many human beings that happen to cross both directions along the Bering Strait. There is also such a thing as the Kelp Highway when it comes to watercraft, toolecraft. There are many community members that would travel. Vikings even visited California before the missions were here. So when people come at me trying to say, well, science says this and science says that, it's like, you do realize a long time ago science said the earth was flat. And then science said the earth was round. And here we go again, where science and community members are again saying the world is flat again. And I'm sitting here like, just be calm and humble in your observations of what we know as fact. And when modern day science is catching up, like new study says DNA has genetic memory. People's organs that were donated still have some of the habits of their previous creator. Oh, gee, Native people have been saying blood memory since time immemorial, and many scientists and colonizers deny that, and yet science is catching up, and then people validate it. And it's frustrating because it's settler colonialism denying community members. We've been brought up in this primitive light, this hunter-gatherer, and we've been denied that our legitimate indigenous sciences, our indigenous technology exists and thrives, and it's constantly dismissed. And it's frustrating because it's settler colonial entitlement denying the existence that other people, other nations, other community members are amazing, competent individuals, and that settler colonialism, these narratives of oppression, should just calm themselves, humble themselves, and be accountable. And I long time ago, I will own up. As a youth, I used to say white people, but I would always say right after that sentence, I don't like white people in this behavior. When I say white, I don't mean pigmentation of their skin. I mean their mind. And it's really negligent of the sacred. It's capitalistic. It's consumeristic. It's privilege. It's negligent. And then I started realizing, you know what? People start getting triggered by that word. When I say white people, that's okay. That's okay.
Well, Kanyon, could I ask a question about that? Because I think that, you know, Lift Economy has been leaning into talking and being more above board around this idea of the need to dismantle white supremacy. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that, just anything that comes up, and how, especially from this perspective of how to kind of share the emotional burden and the workload across kind of all of us who inhabit these spaces, rather than just having it be kind of centering on, you know, those who focus on social justice work or those who focus on anti-oppression work, but how we actually all kind of collectively show up to that work of dismantling white supremacy.
Well, along the thread of my previous statement, when I owned up saying white, I then started shifting my words and saying Western settler colonialism, or the Western settler mentality. It's a Eurocentric and Americentric foundation. And then start pointing out the behaviors. Because when we start accusing people, any psychologist might say, like, it could be problematic pointing out that someone is bad or someone is this. Or like when you say distinct statements versus this behavior is bad, this type of habit or this action is bad, because those things can be corrected. Those things can be accountable for. And humbling ourselves in that accountability is one healthy step. And so when we start dismantling it, one, we need to acknowledge that we are currently all affected by colonization, and all of us are at our various stages of healing. Some of us may not be taking many steps to heal because we may be unfamiliar with it, let alone don't even know how to account for it. And then some of us who are healing may be growing fast or slowly. So some of us are learning. So that's where when I see some of my Native relations who are perpetuating some of those historical traumatic lessons learned, as well as when you think about Native American post-colonial psychology, the psyche of the oppressed take on the characteristics of the oppressor. That happens in many circles. So sometimes we end up repeating these patterns that have been done onto us because that's what we have witnessed and that's what has been effective to impacting our life and also possibly yielded results in impacting other people's lives. So do unto others kind of thing in the not so healthiest fashion. In doing this work, we need to recognize that even though, well, let's say like someone who's new, like learns about decolonization work and this type of stuff, sometimes we jump on board of these things and then do this holier than thou approach of like, I'm more decolonized than you, and it's unhealthy. And when you step into that more superior than, sometimes that replicates the models of oppression that systemically have marginalized community members in the first place, with gentrification, with colonization of Native peoples, let's say with the missions. Outsiders coming in, saying they know better, saying that the current community is ignorant, and that the approaches that these new community members have are better, so therefore you silence, you disenfranchise, and you hinder the original community. Now that can be repeated with decolonizers coming in saying, you're not decolonized, we can do this better.
What I really loved hearing you say, if I could just kind of build on it for the listeners, it sounded like, you know, moving from just being inundated with requests to come and speak and do intros, moving it from just doing kind of one-off introductions and prayer and ceremony to moving into more like the cultural work of actually helping to transform culture so that it's more reverent and more honoring of actual Indigenous Californian history. Did I capture that kind of correctly, or is there anything else you'd like to elaborate on?
Definitely. Well, yeah, I really do want to shift policy to encourage truth in history as a mandate, because if we start thinking about any organization, agency, institution who talks about going into, you know, the 21st century, or talk about, you know, new innovative technology that's greener, better, healthier, more conscious, if all of these people are creating something and they don't even know the history of the land or the people, let alone possibly their own ancestors, how can any decision that they come to be properly informed? Because if you don't think about land management practices traditionally, if you don't think about seasonal winds, you don't think about respecting these life systems, you're coming in and you're making a change to an environment without investing in the local culture. And that's kind of like when we think about the various invasive species in Australia. The rats came off the ships, and then as a quick reactionary improvising answer, they said, hey, let's go get some reptiles. Let's go get some reptiles to kill the rodents. They bring reptiles without even investing and realizing that one is nocturnal and one is daylight. So now the indigenous species are deeply impacted by both two invasive species that were attempted to be brought into the situation to solve one other problem. And that's what happens when you have reactionary, well-intended, superficial, not informed, not invested, and not integral decision-making practices. And I see these struggles all the time from all these, you know, like simple lawns and rules and regulations that we can't have edible gardens providing food for our community. And then when it comes to our little microcosm of how homelessness and prison industrial complex operates, Indigenous communities did not have homelessness. Indigenous communities did not have prisons, yet we have a whole economy based on it, and we deny human existence as integral or responsible. Like when we think of homeless peoples, like not everybody can fit into a mold of how people should operate. You go to work, you do this, you do that, you come home, you do this. You have your little car, you have your this, you have your that. It's like we need to break that societal norm and say there are many approachable models of how communities can live. And many times people are feeling denied access to community because they have been told all their life this is how life is, when in all actuality, there are Indigenous communities around the world that operate totally differently, but there's this spiritual connection. There's this wellness that's beyond, okay, I got food, shelter, yada, yada. Like there's this like unison of energy, this amazing occurrence of connection that a lot of people here, especially in America, are thirsty for, yet they don't even know the word or the definition of what they are thirsty for. And that's why consumerism and capitalism have enterprised off of it. Is like, if you make people unhappy, you tell them they're unhappy, and you tell them that something will bring them happiness, or you give them those little, like, serotonin and dopamine bursts. You get that feel good feeling. The same thing, like when someone gets a job, they really need something. They either want to give their mom, a gift. They want to get a car for the first time. They want to give their family something. They want to pay off a bill that's stressing everybody. They get paid. They do their work. They feel good. It feels right. Sometimes it's usually a lot of altruism. A lot of altruistic gestures give you that happy little boost. But then people associate it with, oh, I made the money, and when I bought that, it felt good, and when I gave that, it felt good. But we then start unhealthy relationships in that capitalistic endeavor, and it's not. I want to shift the way. I want to be of assistance to help educate the community, so they can possibly have an extra perspective to approach the world and make various decisions that might help the world in the future. I know I can't change people. I know I can't change the world, but I would love to give people a perspective just to gnaw on, just to think about, to bring into their life and possibly apply it.
Well, thank you, Kanyon. We are right there with you. And we always love to close our conversations with your sharing how people can reach you, how they can contact you, how they can learn from you, and any specific asks you have in terms of support that you'd like from those that are right along there with you, looking to build this next economy together.
Ooh, well, my name is Kanyon Coyote Woman Sayers-Roods. That's Kanyon with a K. My website is canyonconsulting.com. Both of those are with K's. So I'm #KKLLC. And I have many social media sites, of which, once you get a chance to email me on Kanyon Consulting, or my social media accounts, Kanyon LLC on Facebook and Kanyon Consulting on Instagram, shoot me a message and I can give you access possibly to my more personal accounts, because I do have my own personal YouTube that is Coyote Rants and Rambles, which is always fun. And I intend on creating more for Kanyon Consulting as a more professional basis. So connect on there. Wouldn't mind consultation gigs. I love support and solidarity, so any contributions is helpful. And I love collaborations. If anyone is into off-the-grid sustainable living systems, if anyone is into consultation that'll change the world, if anyone is into creating a network of reliable resources where people can support each other versus outsourcing, I'm all about it. And I would love to learn more about who's all about it too.
Thank you for sharing your time with us on Next Economy Now, and so grateful for the work you're doing in the world, and looking forward to seeing you at some upcoming events and continuing to stay in collaboration with you.
Thank you.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. Lift is an impact consulting firm whose mission is to create, model, and share a locally self-reliant economy that works for the benefit of all life. To listen to all our past episodes or to share your thoughts about the show with us, visit www.lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's lifteconomy.com/podcast. You can also subscribe to this podcast through iTunes, Overcast, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please take a moment to rate us on iTunes. It's really very helpful in allowing these ideas to reach a wider audience. Once again, thanks for listening.